You wake up in the middle of winter. Not the kind of winter where you reach for a thick blanket, turn up the heater, and wait for your phone to tell you the temperature outside. This is a different winter. There is no house around you, no glass window between your body and the wind, no grocery store waiting at the end of the street, no warm jacket hanging by the door, no weather forecast, no electricity, no backup plan. Just your body, your breath, the freezing air, and a world that does not care whether you survive until morning. Now imagine this is not a camping trip. This is your life. You are one of the first humans to face a true winter in the northern world. For generations, your ancestors had lived under warmer skies, where food was easier to find and the cold rarely ruled everything. But now, the land has changed. The sun disappears earlier. The ground hardens beneath your feet. The plants that once fed you are gone. The animals you hunted have moved away, grown scarce, or become more dangerous to approach. And every night, the same question returns. How do you stay alive when the world itself seems to be stealing the heat from your body? You might think the answer is simple. Find a cave, make a fire, wear animal skins. But the truth is far more difficult and far more fascinating, because surviving the first winter was not just about staying warm. It was about solving a chain of problems that no human before you had ever fully faced. How do you keep fire alive when snow and wind try to kill it? How do you find food when the landscape is frozen and empty? How do you protect children, elders, and the injured when every extra mouth means more pressure on the group? How do you sleep when falling asleep in the cold can become the most dangerous moment of the day? And perhaps most importantly, how do you convince a small group of frightened humans not to scatter, not to give up, but to work together long enough to see spring? Because the first winter was not simply a season, it was a test of intelligence, a test of cooperation, a test of memory, planning, fire, clothing, shelter, and trust. And if your ancestors had failed that test, there would be no cities, no languages, no stories, no families passing knowledge from one generation to the next. There would be no you. So before we ask how humans conquered the world, we have to ask a much colder question. How did humans survive the first winter? The strange thing is that when most people imagine prehistoric humans, they picture something surprisingly comfortable. A family sitting safely inside a cave, a fire crackling in the center, animal skins hanging on the walls. A few hunters returning with food while snow falls harmlessly outside. It feels familiar, almost cozy. But that image has shaped the way we think about the distant past for generations, and much of it is misleading. You might assume that the first humans who faced winter simply found caves and waited for spring. After all, caves seem like the perfect shelter. They block the wind, protect against snow, and provide a roof that nature built for free. Yet archaeology tells a more complicated story. Many prehistoric communities did use caves when they could find them. But most humans did not have the luxury of living beside a perfect cave whenever the seasons changed. The landscape itself made that impossible. As humans expanded across vast regions of Eurasia, they crossed open grasslands, frozen valleys, river systems, and enormous stretches of land where suitable caves barely existed. Imagine following a herd of animals for weeks across windswept plain. The herd moves, food moves, and if food moves, you must move too. A cave cannot travel with you. Suddenly, survival becomes much more difficult. The challenge was not simply finding shelter. The challenge was creating shelter wherever life took you. And that required something even more powerful than strength. It required imagination. This is where one of the biggest misconceptions about prehistoric people begins to fall apart. For a long time, people imagined early humans as primitive creatures barely surviving from day to day. But evidence from archaeological sites across Europe and Asia suggests something very different. These people planned ahead. They selected locations carefully, they stored resources, they understood seasonal patterns, and in some cases, they built surprisingly sophisticated shelters long before the first cities, farms, or civilizations ever appeared. In other words, they were not merely reacting to winter, they were preparing for it. That may sound obvious today. You check the weather forecast, you buy extra food before a storm, you bring a jacket if temperatures are expected to drop, but none of those habits appeared out of nowhere. The roots of that behavior stretch deep into prehistory. Somewhere in the distant past, human groups began doing something that many animals could not. They started thinking about problems that had not happened yet, and that ability may have become one of the greatest survival tools our species ever developed. But even planning ahead could not solve the biggest problem, because winter was not simply uncomfortable. Winter was a biological challenge unlike anything most humans had ever faced before. The cold was relentless, food became scarce, energy disappeared faster than it could be replaced, and every degree of temperature lost by the human body brought a person one step closer to danger. Which raises an even more important question. What was the single greatest threat waiting for those first humans when winter arrived? Surprisingly, it was not wolves, it was not bears, and it was not the snow itself. It was something far more ordinary and far more deadly. That something was heat, or more accurately, the loss of it. Right now, your body is performing thousands of invisible tasks every second. Your heart is beating, your lungs are moving air, your brain is processing information. Every one of those actions depends on maintaining a remarkably narrow temperature range. You are, in a sense, a walking furnace, and like every furnace, you must constantly produce energy to stay warm. The problem is that winter never stops trying to steal that energy away. Imagine standing on an open plain during the Ice Age. The wind cuts across the landscape with nothing to slow it down. Snow reflects sunlight back into the sky. The air itself seems to pull warmth from your skin. Every breath carries precious heat out of your body. Every exposed finger becomes colder. Every hour costs energy. And eventually the math stops working. Today, if you feel cold, you can step indoors. You can put on another layer. You can make a hot drink. But for your ancestors, there was often no easy escape. The human body is surprisingly vulnerable to cold. Compared to many Ice Age animals, humans are poorly equipped for winter. You do not have thick fur like a musk ox. You do not grow a dense winter coat like a wolf. You cannot hibernate like a bear. You cannot migrate thousands of miles by instinct like many birds. In fact, if a modern human were suddenly placed into an Ice Age winter with no preparation, survival would become difficult very quickly. This creates a fascinating evolutionary puzzle. If humans are so poorly designed for extreme cold, why didn't winter eliminate them? Why are you here at all? The answer begins with a simple but brutal reality. Cold rarely kills instantly. Instead, it attacks gradually. Your fingers lose dexterity. Your movements slow. Your judgment becomes less reliable. Simple decisions become harder. You grow tired. You want to rest. And that is precisely what makes cold so dangerous. Because when your body begins losing heat faster than it can produce it, the situation can become a downward spiral. You need energy to stay warm, but finding food requires energy. Traveling requires energy. Building shelter requires energy. Keeping a fire alive requires energy. The colder the world becomes, the more calories your body demands. Yet winter is exactly the season when calories become hardest to find. Suddenly, every problem is connected. Food becomes heat. Heat becomes survival. Survival becomes time, and time becomes the difference between seeing another sunrise or not. But the challenge was not limited to individuals. Imagine a small band of 20 people. A few children, several adults, perhaps an elder who carries valuable knowledge about migration routes, hunting grounds, or edible plants. Every person consumes food. Every person needs warmth. Every person depends on the group. A single failed hunt might not affect one day, but several failed hunts in a row could threaten the entire community. This is why winter became one of the greatest tests in human history. Not because it was dramatic, not because it was violent, but because it constantly forced people to solve the same question over and over again. How do you keep producing enough energy to stay alive in a world designed to drain it away? And this is where the story becomes truly remarkable. Because humans did not survive winter by becoming stronger than nature. They survived by becoming smarter than it. They developed a weapon so powerful that it changed the future of our species forever. A tool so important that without it, every human civilization that followed might never have existed. Fire. Fire seems ordinary today. You touch a button, turn a knob, or strike a lighter, and within seconds, heat appears. It feels so natural that it is easy to forget how extraordinary fire really is. For your ancestors, fire was not a convenience. It was the thin glowing line between survival and disaster. Imagine the sun disappearing below the horizon during an Ice Age winter. The temperature begins to fall immediately. The wind grows sharper. Darkness spreads across the landscape. Somewhere in the distance, predators begin to move, and in the middle of all that cold and uncertainty, a small orange flame flickers. That flame changes everything. It creates warmth where none existed. It creates light in a world of darkness. It allows people to gather, communicate, and plan. Most importantly, it allows them to stay alive through the longest nights of the year. This may be one of the greatest turning points in human history. Scientists still debate exactly when humans first gained reliable control over fire. Evidence suggests that our ancestors were using it hundreds of thousands of years ago, and perhaps even earlier in some locations. What matters most is not when it began. What matters is what happened afterward. Because once humans learned to maintain fire consistently, they gained an advantage unlike anything nature had previously given them. For the first time, humans could create their own climate. A small campfire could raise temperatures around a group enough to prevent dangerous heat loss. But that was only the beginning. Fire also transformed food. Think about a piece of meat during winter. Raw, it requires significant effort to chew and digest. Cooked, it becomes softer. More calories become available. More nutrients can be absorbed. Less energy is wasted during digestion. This might sound like a small improvement. In reality, it could mean the difference between maintaining body heat and slowly starving. Every extra calorie mattered, especially during winter. But that was not the only advantage. Fire extended the day itself. Most animals are limited by sunlight. When darkness arrives, activity slows. Humans changed that rule. Around a fire, stories could be shared. Knowledge could be passed on. Children could learn. Plans for future hunts could be discussed. The fire became more than a source of warmth. It became a source of information, and information is often just as valuable as food. Imagine an elder explaining where migrating herds usually travel when snow arrives, or teaching younger hunters how to recognize dangerous weather patterns. Those lessons might save lives months later. Without fire, many of those conversations would never happen. But here is the fascinating part. Keeping a fire alive was often harder than starting one. A modern person can simply light another match. Your ancestors had no such luxury. If a storm extinguished the group's only fire, replacing it could be incredibly difficult. Some groups likely carried embers from place to place. Others carefully protected burning wood through the night. Someone may have been responsible for watching the flames while everyone else slept. In a strange way, fire became one of humanity's earliest shared responsibilities. Everyone depended on it. Everyone protected it. Everyone suffered if it disappeared. Yet even fire had limits. A campfire could warm people. It could cook food. It could light the darkness. But it could not solve another growing problem. The farther humans moved into colder regions, the more they realized that surviving winter required carrying warmth with them. And unlike fire, warmth could not always stay in one place. Sometimes you had to take it wherever you went. That realization would lead to another invention so important that you are wearing its descendant right now. Clothing. Clothing seems so ordinary that you probably haven't thought about it today. You put it on in the morning without a second thought. A jacket for the cold, shoes for the ground, a hat if the weather turns unpleasant. But for your Ice Age ancestors, clothing was one of the most important technologies ever invented. Not because it made life comfortable, because it made entire regions of the planet possible. Imagine trying to hunt during winter without covering your skin. Every gust of wind steals warmth. Every hour outdoors drains precious energy. Every journey becomes more dangerous. Even with fire waiting back at camp, survival would remain extremely difficult. The solution was obvious in one sense. The animals thriving in the cold already carried the insulation humans lacked. Woolly mammoths, reindeer, bison, musk oxen. Their bodies were protected by thick layers of fur, skin, and fat. The challenge was figuring out how to turn those natural defenses into something humans could wear. And that required far more skill than simply draping a hide over your shoulders. Fresh animal skin quickly becomes stiff, heavy, and uncomfortable. Untreated hides can crack, they can shrink, they can become useless in harsh conditions. So prehistoric people developed techniques to process skins and transform them into practical clothing. They scraped away tissue, they softened hides, they stretched them, they treated them with animal fats and other natural materials. Generation after generation, these skills improved. The result was something remarkable. Humans began carrying their own portable shelter. A properly prepared animal skin trapped warm air close to the body. Layering multiple skins created even greater protection. Suddenly, a person could travel farther from the fire. They could hunt longer. They could explore colder landscapes. And they could survive winters that would previously have been impossible. But here is where the story becomes unexpectedly fascinating. How do scientists know when humans started wearing clothing? After all, animal skins rarely survive for tens of thousands of years. The answer comes from a surprisingly unlikely source: lice, more specifically, clothing lice. Today there are lice that live primarily in human hair and lice that live primarily in clothing. Genetic studies suggest these two groups split from a common ancestor long ago. That split could only happen after humans began regularly wearing clothes. In other words, tiny parasites may preserve clues about one of humanity's most important inventions. It is a strange thought. A creature no larger than a grain of rice may know part of the story that ancient clothing itself could not preserve. But clothing solved more than a temperature problem. It solved a mobility problem. Fire could keep you warm at camp. Clothing allowed you to carry warmth into the world, and that changed everything. A hunter could follow migrating animals across frozen landscapes. Families could move through colder regions. Communities could expand into territories their ancestors could never have entered. Yet even the best clothing had limits. You still needed somewhere safe to sleep, somewhere protected from wind, somewhere to store food, somewhere children could survive the night. And despite what many people imagine, that place was not always a cave. In fact, some of the most ingenious shelters in human history were built far from caves entirely, and their builders accomplished something that would have seemed almost impossible. They learned how to create homes in one of the harshest environments on Earth. Those homes came in many forms. Some were built from wood, some from hides stretched over frames, some were partially dug into the ground to trap warmth and block the wind, and in certain parts of Ice Age Europe, people created something so unusual that archaeologists were stunned when they discovered it. They built houses from mammoth bones. Imagine standing on a frozen plain nearly 20,000 years ago. Trees are scarce, winter dominates the landscape, building materials are limited, yet around you lie the remains of enormous mammoths, animals that once towered over humans. Instead of wasting those valuable resources, people found another use for them. Massive skulls, long curved tusks, heavy leg bones, piece by piece, these remains were arranged into circular structures. Animal hides were likely stretched over the framework. Inside, families could gather around fires protected from the relentless wind. In a remarkable twist, the very animals that helped people survive through food and clothing also helped provide shelter. But that was only one solution. Across different regions, human groups adapted in different ways. Some communities built windbreaks from branches. Others chose campsites near natural barriers. Some dug shallow depressions into the earth, taking advantage of the fact that underground temperatures remain more stable than the freezing air above. What makes these shelters so fascinating is that they reveal something important about the human mind. Animals create shelters too. Birds build nests, beavers build dams, foxes dig dens, but humans do something different. Humans imagine a future problem and design a solution before the problem arrives. That ability may seem ordinary to you. You lock your door before a storm, you buy food before a blizzard, you prepare for tomorrow. Yet that way of thinking helped our ancestors survive some of the harshest environments on Earth, and it is still shaping your life today. Think about it. Your insulated walls, your roof, your central heating, your winter clothing, your food storage systems, even your emergency supplies. Many of these modern comforts trace their origins back to the same challenge your ancestors faced thousands of years ago. How do you stay alive when winter arrives? The technologies have changed. The problem has not. But there is one final piece of this story. A piece that may be more important than fire, more important than clothing, and even more important than shelter, because a single person, no matter how intelligent, could rarely survive an Ice Age winter alone. A lone hunter could become injured, a fire could go out, a hunt could fail, a storm could arrive unexpectedly. Nature was simply too unpredictable. Yet humans did survive again and again, for thousands of generations. Why? Because the greatest survival tool our species ever developed was not a physical object, it was each other. Archaeologists have discovered ancient human skeletons showing severe injuries that would have made hunting difficult or impossible. Broken bones, mobility problems, conditions that lasted for years, yet those individuals survived long after their injuries occurred. How? Someone helped them, someone shared food, someone carried supplies, someone kept them warm, someone chose cooperation over abandonment. That may not sound revolutionary, but in a world where every calorie mattered, helping another person came at a cost. And yet humans repeatedly made that choice. Around campfires, knowledge was shared, food was divided, children were protected, the elderly passed on experience, the group became stronger than any individual. In many ways, civilization did not begin with cities, it did not begin with agriculture, and it certainly did not begin with technology. It began when small groups of humans learned that survival was easier together than alone. So when you turn on a heater during winter, when you zip up a jacket, when you step inside a warm house while snow falls outside, you are experiencing the final result of a journey that began tens of thousands of years ago. You did not invent that comfort, you inherited it. It was passed down through countless generations of people who learned how to master fire, create clothing, shelter, share resources, and face winter together. And perhaps that is the most remarkable part of the story. The first humans did not survive because they were the strongest creatures on Earth. They survived because they were adaptable, they were creative, they were cooperative, and every winter they endured became another step toward the world you live in today. If you enjoyed exploring the hidden struggles and incredible ingenuity of our ancestors, be sure to subscribe to Duck Psychology for more journeys into human evolution, survival, and the forgotten stories that shaped who we are. Because the next time you feel the warmth of a winter evening, you may remember that somewhere in the distant past, that warmth had to be earned. And perhaps the most amazing part is this: every challenge your ancestors overcame is still living inside you. The ability to adapt, the instinct to cooperate, the determination to keep going when conditions become difficult. Those qualities helped humans survive their first winters, cross continents, and eventually build the world we know today. If stories like this make you see humanity and yourself in a new way, then you're in the right place. Here on Duck Psychology, we explore the hidden history of human evolution, prehistoric life, ancient survival, and the fascinating science that shaped who we are. So if you don't want to miss the next journey into our distant past, take a moment to subscribe, turn on notifications, and join us for the next story. Because the story of human history is not really about the past. It's the story of how you got here, and we're only just getting started.